Hello, I'm Bob the Bookerer and welcome to my channel. And today I wanted to talk a bit about the books that I've been reading this week. I hope you're all having a lovely week. It's a relatively sunny one at the time of filming. And yeah, I hope everyone is doing really, really well. With that, let's get talking a bit about some of these books. So first up, we have Invisible Dogs by Charles Boyle. And this is a really interesting book that really took me by surprise in terms of what it was doing. So the core idea of this is there is a man who is a writer who is visiting a foreign country that goes unnamed in the book, but actually a lot of the acknowledgements or kind of end part of this book talks about various books set in China and sort of visits around that. And the book did feel like it was aiming at somewhere vaguely East Asian and particularly somewhere with a sense of a kind of a government that had quite a strong role in people's lives. And so Invisible Dogs takes this idea of this writer who is going to visit, and he keeps on being told by everyone around him that there are no dogs in that country, that they have been wiped out and that they are, you know, you wouldn't see them because they are unclean or whatever. And he keeps on seeing dogs. And in fact, we have pictures in this book of dogs, which is always nice. And it's sort of used that he is sort of seeing these dogs and knowing that something else is going on. In many ways, there's a kind of unseeing that's happening. And if any of you have ever read The City and the City by China Miéville, he talks about that a lot in that book, about the idea of unseeing. And that feels exactly like what's happening here. The journalist or this writer is the kind of person who it's dangerous for him to be able to see these things, because that means he's potentially exposing dangerous things that are happening in the world. And so I thought the book was really interesting in the way it explored this, and kind of playing around with this idea that he is a dangerous person because he has the ability to speak the truth, but he also could, in theory, be weaponized as a state part of the state apparatus, as somebody who is, you know, telling it like it is, or who is reinforcing the message of the state. And so a very short novel that has a sort of political focus, but one that I thought was really interesting for what it was exploring. Next up, we have Trezza Azzopardi with The Hiding Place. And as part of my Booker project, I'm still doing that. I went back and I'm currently reading the shortlist from 2000. And this was one of those books. And I thought this is really interesting in so many ways. It's a novel that isn't necessarily about something in the way that lots of other novels are, where there's a point perhaps, or there's a political point of view or whatever. This novel is largely just about a family, but it does so much more with that, I think. So it takes as its core idea a Maltese family living in Cardiff in Tiger Bay. And they are this small sort of close-knit family, but they realize that there are all of these secrets that are hidden in everything that's been going on. And without going too much into detail about it or giving any spoilers, we learn quite early into this book that Dolores, one of the sisters and the one we hear most through during the book, is there was an accident that happened in the home when she was quite young that led to her hand being burnt. And that becomes a big motif for other parts of her life, where there's a great deal about what that hand means to her in day-to-day life, but also occasionally if she sees old pictures and is trying to work out if her hand is in it and all of those things. So it's a really there's that, but then also this book looks at lots of other parts about, for example, the migrant experience. So them as a small family who are trying to sort of make this life work in Cardiff, not necessarily knowing a great deal of other Maltese people around them, and trying to just get on with their day. And I thought it was just so beautifully done. These sisters felt very vivid and alive to me, and I just really greatly enjoyed what the book was getting at here. And last but not least, a very different book, a non-fiction book, and a book that was incredibly difficult to read in many ways. This is I'll Never Call Him Dad Again by Caroline Darian, who is the daughter of Gisèle Pellicot, who was the woman who was at the heart of the trial in France in the last year or so, who had basically been a victim of really horrible offences from her husband. Essentially, Giselle Pellico's husband had been drugging her to make her sleep for really long periods of time, and had then been taking photos of her and videos of her as she had been assaulted by various men who the husband had invited over. A really difficult read from that subject matter alone. But this book by her daughter goes into some other parts that I knew nothing about in terms of this whole trial and story. So Caroline was herself, something I hadn't realised, had also been victim of these same druggings as well. It happened only a few times. I say only, it's still obviously horrific, but compared to the sort of many years that was happening to the mother, this was sort of a couple of instances. But the daughter only found out about this through the evidence coming up in her mother's trial, which is incredibly upsetting in many ways. And this book is a really honest look at how that also affected her mental health really significantly. She sort of started having almost psychotic episodes and having real breakdowns. And so Caroline then starts to pursue as well, or sets up a charity and a sort of legal challenge as well around chemical submission, about the use of chemicals for this, and actually the fact that so many everyday chemicals could also be used for this effect, including sort of antihistamines and things like that as well. So I think it's incredibly difficult because she talks about her mum's trial and all of these other details that I hadn't realised. So the various ways that her relationship with her mum became this really complicated thing, because at various points Giselle Pellico didn't believe perhaps that, or couldn't acknowledge that it happened to her daughter, but also the various ways that Giselle Pellico's husband had been manipulative in other ways to ensure that all of this could happen. I think that's some aspect of it that the more they were saying it in the book, I realised it had to have been the case, but I hadn't realised that was part of the story initially, because to cover up this crime, he had to make Giselle Pellico think that she was going mad, or that she was having various other medical issues that meant that she was sleeping for long periods of time and couldn't remember, the next day when she's, why she'd been blacked out for 8 hours, or why she maybe had aches in her body and all these other things. And so this book is just really difficult in many ways, but I think incredibly important for what it says about the ways that that these two women in the story especially, and there are other women who are mentioned, not by name, but as other victims of these types of assault, what these what this says about the ways that the men who were involved in this viewed women, and particularly their agency, their sexuality, their bodies, really horrific stuff. I don't think I'd realised quite how many people had been involved in this, in terms of the men who would come and assault these women. It's horrific reading, but an incredibly important book in so many ways. Yeah, I totally understand for many people if this is a book that people cannot stomach, but if you do feel like you're able to take it on and read it, I really highly recommend it, because I think it speaks so powerfully about the case, but also the various ways that that this almost didn't come to light. A big part of how Dominique Pellico was caught was that he had been he was caught upskirting, and he therefore was arrested, and then that was when they saw other photos and evidence on his phone. And actually it's terrifying to think what would have happened if that hadn't come to light. So yeah, this is a really horrifying book, but the bravery I think it must have taken to write this is really quite astounding. Yeah, so a tough one, but I recommend it if you think that this won't be too much for you as well. So those are the books I've been reading this week, and as you can imagine, some tricky reading in there, but I'm still reading for the book prizes. So that is a bit of the old Booker shortlists, and also for the Polari Prize, where I'm reading as a judge, and the reading for that is going okay, relatively well. I keep on not giving myself nearly as much time as I should do for that. But it's still ticking along. And there are lots of books that I really wish I could be speaking to you about as well, but can't. But still, the book prize reading process is a good and lively one. And we should have a long list before very long. I think it probably in about a month or more. But anyway, that's all going on. So apologies, these are three very short books, because that's pretty much the only thing I've been able to read outside of the other prize reading. But I hope you're keeping really well. Take care and speak to you all soon. Bye bye.